welcome to another episode of the Shrier Consulting Moment. Today we address one of my favorite topics in all of personal development, maybe one of my favorite topics at all, which is happiness. We live in probably the most abundant generation in the history of the world, and yet somehow we're unhappy. The rates of depression, clinical depression, are at all-time highs. The prescribed medications for antidepressants are at an all-time high. And scientists who researchers will tell you that the actual cases that have a clearly justifiable reason, being if it's predisposed to genetic disorder or whatever, is very small. It's 3, 4, 5%. So what about the other 95%? That's the society we live in today. So I just finished watching a fabulous podcast or whatever presentation by a man named Mo Gawdat, and he's a fascinating character. He was born in Egypt, had a very challenging life. At some point, he lost a child to a very basically medical malpractice, that he had appendicitis, and the doctor made a bunch of reckless mistakes that led to his 21-year-old son dying. And he said only at that point, after his son died, did he start to come onto this happiness thing. He said he was very wealthy, even though he grew up with very little education in Egypt, but he ended up becoming one of the top executives in Microsoft, then eventually Google, then eventually Google World, and he was very famous and very rich, but he was miserable. And then he started slowly developing this concept, ironically, as an engineer. He finds that very funny, that he discovered this key to happiness through an engineering theory. And he says that led him to start evaluating what makes you happy, what makes you sad. So he has very interesting insights that you might not have heard before. His first insight is happiness is merely the lack of unhappiness. And what's his proof? He says, look at babies, look at children. Most children, with very few exceptions, are happy all the time unless there's some kind of thing that makes them unhappy. If a baby has a dirty diaper, or they're in pain, or they're teething, but other than that, they're happy all the time. Look at 4 or 5-year-old kids go to school, at least where I live. I don't know the rest of the world necessarily, but where I live, they're hopping, they're scupping, they're all over the place, they're enjoying it, they're smiling, they're smiling with their friends. And only when we get to a point where we actually start to discover there's such a thing as profound unhappiness, so you start becoming miserable. Now this is actually becoming a problem at younger ages. It used to be, this wasn't until teenagehood that this really kicked in. Now it's adolescence. Now we're talking 9, 10, 11-year-olds and God forbid, attempting suicide and terrible things, or even committing suicide, or anorexia, or cutting, or terrible things. But he says all you need to do, again, all in air quotes, all, is achieve a state where you're not unhappy. You don't have to try to be happy. You have to not be unhappy. And that might sometimes feel like we're playing semantics. Not semantics at all. If you say, I just want to be not unhappy, you don't have to go searching for utopia and all the biggest pleasures and hedonism. Just look for stability. And he says, then the next step, he said, the challenge with that is that so much stuff today makes us unhappy. So even if you realize that all you have to do is not be unhappy to be happy, but so much stuff makes us unhappy. There's a story that, not from him, but from Tony Robbins. He tells a story. One time he was on a big long flight from Los Angeles to Australia, which is an 18-hour flight. Crazy long flight. And the stewardess of Qantas Airlines, this is the main airline in Australia, I think it's the only airline in Australia actually, gets on the radio and says, for the first time in the history of Kwanzaa, we have Wi-Fi on an international flight. And everyone goes crazy as if, the Messiah just came out of the sky. And what happens 10 minutes later? It goes out. How long? The whole flight. And people are screaming and swearing and angry and livid. And Tony says, 10 minutes ago was a miracle. Now it's an expectation. Now you're upset. That's how easily it goes from the happiness to unhappiness to misery. He says another point. This person Mo. He says, incredible concept. He says, you cannot relive a physical pain. If someone hurt you or hit you or you got a burn, you can't relive it. You can't feel it again. However, he said, emotional pain, if someone hurt your feelings or your emotions or broke up with you, you could feel that pain over and over again to the extent you could amplify it more than it was when it happened. And that, he said, is what leads to the most profound unhappiness for everybody, which is what he calls suffering. He says, everyone has pain, everyone has challenges, everyone has struggles. He said, but reliving that pain and reliving that suffering, you don't have to do. Because if you can get out of that, that's the key to happiness right there, in a nutshell. So he has a formula, though. He says, events minus expectations equals happiness or unhappiness. So let's give an example. Let's say you're going on a fancy trip to Disneyland. So your expectations are very high. You and your family spend thousands of dollars, plane tickets, hotels, the park fees, everything. And you get there and it's pouring rain. Because in Los Angeles, anyone knows Los Angeles, it doesn't pour rain so often. Sometimes there's fires, all of it's snow, but it's not pouring rain so often. So your expectation was very high, and the reality is it ended up being very low reality because you got so disappointed. So now you're going to be very upset. Whereas if you went to, let's say, Chicago in the middle of January and it was raining, you wouldn't be as upset because, of course, it rains in January in Chicago. It's the middle of the winter. So that's one of formula. Then he says, you don't have to search out, like we said a minute ago, fun for happiness. Because there's fun, if you're a happy person, all you need to do is maintain homeostasis, equilibrium, and you'll be happy. So a person who's unhappy is constantly looking for fun activities, but that's not real happiness. That's just trying to get dopamine, trying to get your body to produce an artificial sense that you're happy. Because there's a trick with dopamine, which I didn't know until I saw him talk about this, is that not only is the dopamine very addictive, but if your body, say, takes in a certain percentage of dopamine, every time in order to feel the same thing, you have to have the higher and higher percentage of dopamine. So you'll never get high on dopamine. You'll never get there. It's like most drugs. You have to take more and more of it to get it's the same place. So then he asks a question. We'll finish up. We have to finish up. We're hitting the mark here. He asks a question. These three questions actually. What would you do? What would you do to be happy before that? Hold on. Reverse that. Sorry. Why would you be happy or unhappy before something happens? That it hasn't happened yet. And it might never happen or it might happen. So wait till it happens and then get upset or happy. Then he asks, what is there you could do about it or fix it? So let's see an example. You're in traffic. Traffic's gonna happen in Los Angeles, New York, in most major cities, no matter what you do. So either you could choose to change your job or work at home and ask them to work at home, or whatever. But if you're going to commute every day, there's going to be traffic. And you're just gonna get upset about it every day, and you can't change it. That's bordering on, I hate to use a word like this, infantile. And the final question is, can you accept what's happening as reality that's supposed to be? So if you can answer all those questions affirmatively, then you're on the road to happiness. And we're going to talk much more about this in the upcoming podcast, because it's something that I'm very passionate about and something I think is sorely lacking in the world today. So have a wonderful day. Look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great day.